Yes.
Yes, thank you. My question is for Professor Raffaelli. Thank you very much for your excellent talk. My question is about the, you could say, political implications of this theology. So, man, yeah? Okay, so man is an image of this Trinitarian toticipation, exactly, but he's corporeal, of course, so this introduces an element of deficiency. And for Comenius, as you mentioned, the way that this is kind of bridged is through dialogue and cooperation, that people kind of pool their knowledge and capabilities, and this kind of helps to go up back into like higher levels of participation in the Trinity and back into true knowledge. But from what I know of Campanella, this corporealization of man is actually seen as a much more negative way, much more pessimistically. And that's maybe my question is why, what are the political implications of that for him? So rather, as you mentioned, he doesn't go the direction of Comenius. What does it mean for him? Thanks.
This is a big question. Big question. Okay. Yeah. I do not think the Campanella is difficult to understand because he was forced to two lines of interpretation. One, idealistic one, so Haecker writes just two lines about Campanella. He's not a philosopher. He's an astrologer, nothing to do with philosophy. And the influence of Haecker was, unfortunately, in this sense, very strong. And then Campanella as philosopher of sensory experiences, so feelings, and that doesn't correspond to reality. So for Campanella, sapientia comes from sapere. That means sapere is a term that records. Yeah, and so that means a very stronger connection to being, and that's the situation that explains Campanella, in my opinion. So he sees separation, sees that knowledge and being are slowly separating from one another. And regarding negativity, so man participates in toticipation in a limited way. That means that you asked about political consequences. That means that I would say we are called to reflect toticipation in our limited world. And of course, you will not find a coherent theory of action in Campanella. That's why I introduced Comenius. I think is that coherent version of concrete action. You will find a symbolic world in Campanella. It's very difficult for our modern understanding of reality. Campanella is very difficult to understand. But I do not see, so the Civitas Solis is a city held by Pon, Potentia Sapientia Amor, and it's really a symbol. You have to figure out, so he was 27, almost 30, because later 3 years, almost 30 years in prison, and he couldn't publish, so it was extremely difficult.
Okay, thank you for your answer, and we will give floor to the next question.
Thank you, Matteo, for your contribution. You touched Campanella's anticipation of capitalist social form, and my question is why all hesitation to tackle his utopian perspective expressed in his work The Sunny State, and instead of to present this concept, you turn our attention to Comenius' suggestion to institutional reform.
Yeah, I think my answer, so if we do not have so much time, in my perspective, in Comenius you can find a coherent way, a coherent, practical perspective that you cannot find in Campanella. For many reasons, I think we cannot, we don't have time to speak about this now. But I see the Civitas Solis as a symbol with many, I would say many contradictions. If we see it through our modern understanding of the world. And what I wanted to express is a line. So Campanella understands very well what happens at the threshold of modernity, so the beginning of modernity, and this finds its coherence in Comenius, I think, from the practical point of view.
Okay, thank you. We have time for more questions, and if there could be some question also concerning cybernetics.
Yes, no, this is directed to Ryan. So thank you, Ryan, for the talk. So the way I've understood your paper is you've traced out an alternative speculative grammar of cybernetics. And my question is just related to what you hinted at in your paper regarding, you mentioned towards the beginning in your section on the Jesuit genealogy of cybernetics, this element of spiritual practice itself as a form of programming itself. And then you also mentioned this idea that the speculative elements of this alternative vision is mediated through the human mind as well, the human spirit. So maybe one of the questions I may be asking to you is thinking a bit more about the kind of spiritual technologies, the spiritual techniques which would attune the human spirit, compare it like the Jesuit techniques that you mentioned, attune the human mind to this alternative spiritual vision. So maybe it's just a bit expansion upon what you've hinted at, either through Jesuit spiritual practices or towards the end, Dionysius's vision of liturgy and mystagogy. And so maybe just a bit of an expansion of that. Do you want to ask your question as or so Brian can answer them together? Okay.
So specifically my question has to do with, you position Athanasius Kircher as representing a third line that Blaise Pascal, the Jansenist on the one hand, and Gottfried Leibniz, the Protestant, on the other hand, sort of esoteric Protestant on the other hand. They both kind of evade this in different directions. You also talk about kind of this cybernetic opposition between Aristotle and Plato at the beginning of philosophy. My question is whether or not you see Kircher, and I mean Kircher, he was a Jesuit who was trying to redeem the Hermetic tradition, and I think even more deeply than that, the Neo-Pythagorean tradition, which goes back to Nomenius, who is an influence on Origen, which is the subject of your forthcoming book, Restoring Reason. So I want to challenge you a little bit. I know that you tend to prefer Platonism over Pythagoreanism, but I mean, from the standpoint of the defense of specifically Kircher as a Jesuit cybernetician, do you not think that that's a kind of Pythagorean cybernetics more than it even is a Platonist cybernetics? That's my question.
Wonderful. So I'll start with Huygens and I'll move on to Anna's talk. So technique, the primitive word techne that we heard from the Greeks and that forms the word techniques in technology, initially referred to an external action, namely of dividing or cutting or making things. And it's only metaphorically then ascribed to the way by which we can divide our thoughts or practices, such that, for instance, when you have a military regime or when you have a poetic contest, you're performing according to certain regimens of practice that you perform before. And every artist and every athlete knows this. Now, those spiritual techniques can also be further extended, as they were among the Desert Fathers, to something like training or practice of the soul to attend its mind to God, and also to orient thoughts and habits and actions in a way that will always lead back to a contemplation of God and the divine. And arguably, this is something that the Orphics and the Mystics, the Lucian mysteries, everyone was practicing, but became concentrated and also was developed in a literary mode, but also internationally by the monastic movement in late antiquity and then the Middle Ages and on to the present day. So it's not surprising that techniques and technology can be interpolated into the spirit where it originates and also intensified in the spirit. A very good example of this that I've flagged in my dissertation is how the syllogism is a kind of mechanical computer for automating memory. That is, we memorize the arguments so that when we're making arguments in rhetoric, that we know exactly what makes a valid argument so that we can persuade our opponent. And if they have the same training, they will also recognize the argument true, so you won't dispute it in advance. So when I'm following up on Anna's question, I believe from my studies of Plato and the late Pythagoreans that the Pythagorean tradition that we take to be classical today is a kind of pastiche of Hellenistic sources and early imperial sources, and that it's very, very difficult to get back to the original Pythagorean thought. Now we do have a few sources. There are some testimonia from the classical era. Sadly, Aristotle's 2 books on Pythagoreans are lost, but we have Philolaus, for instance. Anyway, I believe that by the time of Eudorus of Alexandria and Moderatus of Gades, by the time of Philo, by the time of the Alexandrian Christians, the whole traditions have been so thoroughly syncretized that it's difficult to unwind what is Pythagorean, what is Platonic. Now, what is unique about the Pythagoreans, Aristotle tells us this, that for the Pythagoreans, numbers were in things, or for Plato, the ideas are beyond the material world, beyond the world. So what's unique about the Neo-Pythagoreans is that they elevate for instance, the monad and the multiple, or the paras, the finite and the infinite, to principles that are beyond the world and that precede the world, such that the world itself is kind of unfolding a multiplicity. And that is a distinctly Platonic thing we find in the Timaeus, we find it in another way in the Parmenides. So I agree that the Hermetic tradition that is taken up by Athanasius Kircher is Pythagorean, but it's not for that reason less Platonic. The question, however, is how thoroughly Platonic it can be. And what I would argue, and I think we've discussed this before, I'm sure if we disagree still, is that Plato's critique of the Pythagoreans that I find in Republic 520, in I think Republic 8, 520, is that you cannot interrogate the fundamental questions of what is number, or how it is you would calculate with number, or how would you, as it were, simple various deductions of geometry and mathematics, unless you can begin by dividing the forms of number, that is, by dividing one from another and forming the basic idea of quantity, which he does in Parmenides. And so I would argue that Platonism is a more general way of dialectically interrogating the origins of quantity and calculation, and thereby any calculated assemblage of various arithmetical unities that can be symbolically correlated down the Hermetic tradition. With that being said, just to go back briefly, I think there's a lot more to be said about genealogy.
We are running out of time.
We'll clear on this later. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, thank you. And we have last short question, and that's the end.
Okay, thank you, Brian, for your presentation. I'm a Jesuit myself, so I was quite curious about learning of what you intend for Jesuit cybernetics.
You're a psycho-engineer of the spirit.
Okay, so my question is, in the Ignatian spirituality, relationship is very important with God, with the others, with yourself, and through vulnerability. So where do those things stay in this Trinitarian ontology of computers? I mean, like, my concern is also because of transhumanism and posthumanism that may come as a consequence of this pushing forward technology and cybernetics. So I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, so the topic of transhumanism often arises when discussing the technological advancement of the prosthetic re-engineering of the human person. I am much more sanguine about this. Sometimes people call this Christian transhumanism. I don't think it's heretical. I think what we're concerned about actually is concerned about preserving the unique dignity of the human essence as it's been handed down to us from generations immemorially, and also what makes us who we are in our embodied state. I don't think we're going to lose that anytime soon. I do think, however, that prosthesis always blends into augmentation, and that augmentation is something that is called upon in order to, as it were, technologically not only fix but also expand the possibilities of human action in the world that we've been doing since the invention of, the beginning of fire and the use of tools. So I don't think we, as Bernard Stiegler is very, very good on this. He follows a number of French historians of science, and I don't think it's arguable today that the carapace of tool making that we've inherited from even before human history is a kind of spiritual organology that allows us to extend the organs of thought in embodied ways through actions upon the world, and that we're always assuming them in more intense ways if we embody. Smartphones are a very good example of this. Just a few decades ago, everyone interfaced with computers through keyboards and mouses at their home. Now we carry them with us. Soon we'll have them sort of implanted in us or on our glasses and anywhere else. And it will not be too long before we'll carry computers with us and we'll be sort of bound with computers wherever we go. And many people find this terrifying. Many people found the invention of the city to be terrifying, as we find in the Ethic of the Gilgamesh. But I think human civilization will carry on and be better for it. So I'm very sanguine about that, and I think that that's the higher destiny of humanity that we're called to achieve through the exercise of reason for the goodness and providence of God.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for your knowledge and sharing it with us.